there.
All right, sounds good.
Lovely. So Culadasa, just something we started saying before I started the recording was, I'm curious to know now at your level of practice, um, how much time do you still? And I know you've got a lot of other things going on in your life, but how much time do you typically still try to spend each day in your practice in meditation, formal meditation?
Mhm. That's a good question. Well, I usually I usually spend I'm very typically would be something between 1 and 2 hours. I try to schedule everything in my day so that things don't start too early for me to do that. So it's a part of my I have a routine, a morning routine that I follow, as most people do, and um, there's a certain point in my morning routine where meditation fits in. Um, it varies. The total amount of time I spend meditating varies uh, because there are other things that come up. I need an appointment. Need to be available for an appointment, medical appointment, say early in the morning, and it conflicts with my usual meditation time. So uh, I may have to do a shorter meditation later, or just meditate at a different time that day, um, or something maybe scheduled that keeps me from meditating as long as I might would normally do. But I'd like to clarify something about the relationship between uh, formal practice, on the cushion practice, and practice in your daily life. The most important thing anybody can do once they've begun to gain this, even a reasonable bit of mastery of sitting practice. By this, I mean you get past the point of just constant mind wandering and things like that, is to try to bring your practice into your daily life. Um, but there's always going to be a difference. There are things when you succeed in learning to invoke the particular faculties that you develop in meditation and apply them in certain ways in your daily life, it it gives you something very, very different to work with. It's a different kind of experience, and it's hugely valuable. So much that in order to try to impress people with the importance of that, I say things like, well, that's why they call it practice, so you practice on the cushion so that you can bring it into your life on a daily basis. Um, but at the same time, for somebody to interpret that, well, at some point, my whole life's a meditation, so I don't need to sit anymore, is mistaken. Uh, because there are things that you're going to do in the beginning. Of course, you would never succeed at meditating if you tried to meditate in your daily life. You wouldn't even know where to begin. Uh, the best instructions couldn't convey to you what the meditative state or states are like that you would like to invoke in your daily life. And I can't imagine that it would be reasonably possible for the vast majority of people to ever do that. Um, so sitting practice is enormously important in the beginning, but it doesn't become less important as you develop the ability to apply your meditative skills throughout your day, and your daily life becomes a meditation, because as it was in the beginning, so it will be always, is that withdrawing yourself from the noise and activity and busyness of daily life, you are going to be able to go into yourself in much deeper ways than you could possibly do with your eyes and your ears open and in the world. So now, in my case, like there are things that are very important to me to do that I could only do in sitting practice. And they're at the same time, to live my life fully means to bring as much of my meditation skills into my daily life as possible. So, in a sense, I could say what I'm really describing here is trying to be actually meditating uh, most, if not all, of my waking hours, and sometimes in my dream states as well. But we're talking about the division between the secluded practice and what we might call active practice. And there is going to be, both are going to always be desirable, always to be productive. Um, I hesitate to say necessary because that makes it sounds like, well, it's something unfortunate going to happen if you don't do these. Well, in which a sense there is, you don't have the benefits that come from that. But certainly both forms of practice are always going to be extremely valuable and extremely productive. Where you should be trying to go to is a place where you're meditating essentially 24 hours a day in some form or another, and that you make sure that you have enough time to get the full benefits of, of a secluded practice. That's what I think of when I sit down and close my eyes, is I've gone into a kind of seclusion. So the norm for me would be, depending on the demands of my life, an hour to 2 hours. Sometimes it ends up being less than that. Sometimes I have an opportunity to make it much more than that. But yeah, 24-hour a day meditation with 1 to 2 hours of secluded meditation, more as needed, less as precluded by other events.
Makes sense. And that's sort of keeping with what you say right from the beginning, when one starts practicing 1 to 2 hours a day with some retreat time is sort of uh, a golden minimum, a golden ideal to strive towards, and more than that as you are able to and feel like it.
Right.
Yeah. Um, uh, this point of bringing meditation into one's daily life and doing it off the cushion, this comes up a lot. And I've heard your usual answer around this point of how to do that has been often around the mindful review, which I can see, the value in that. But is there anything more than just the mindful review when you talk about meditating in daily life?
Absolutely. Meditation involves, on the one hand, the development of skills and faculties, and it follows the maintenance of those skills and faculties once developed. The other part of it is the application of those faculties once you have them. Mindfulness in daily life is the application of your meditation skills in a particular way, in a particular context. So, but that's far from the only way that you can bring your practice into your daily life. And I encourage people as early as they can in their meditation practice to begin to discover how all of the things that they're doing on the cushion can also be done in daily life. So you can cultivate uh, stable attention in daily life, and you can cultivate powerful awareness in daily life. Um, First, you have to develop these skills and understand them and their relationship to each other. And of course, the corresponding need for conscious power in order to sustain both stable attention and expanded awareness. That's what the work on the cushion is doing for you. But when you bring it into your daily life, and I give people examples of this, there are some examples that are very close to what you do on the cushion, which is you find yourself with a period of time available to you. You're standing in line waiting to check out. You're sitting in a doctor's office waiting for your appointment, to be called for your appointment. You're sitting in a car at a traffic light waiting for the light to change. You can just follow your breath and expand your awareness for that short period of time. You're essentially doing the same thing that you do on the cushion, but you're finding lots of little ways to do that in your daily life. The other thing is to take what you were doing on the cushion. Okay, it's training my mind so that my attention is wherever it's most appropriate. And I'm dwelling in a place of expanded awareness so that the awareness can tell me where it's most appropriate. Now, when I'm sitting on a cushion with my eyes closed, most appropriate is by far more likely to be on the meditation object. I mean, it could be on something else. It could be on pain. It could be on emotions or things like that. But it's most likely to be on the meditation object continuously. That's the whole point of sitting down, going into seclusion. When you're living in your daily life, though, you can practice having your attention appropriately directed, not constantly bouncing around, thinking about this, thinking about, oh, what's going to happen later. Uh, you know, that you could just paying attention to what is appropriate to pay attention to in the moment, and having this expanded awareness which keeps you on track. It knows when you're deviating from that. And of course, in the process, you gradually learn all kinds of things about what brings about those deviations. And sometimes it is important for you to shift your attention to something else. And you'll have this kind of aha experience in that. Oh, this is why the mind works the way it does. Oh, this is why attention isn't always stable anyway. But I can bring much more stability because most of what my attention in daily life is going to is pointless, useless, time-wasting things. So meditating in daily life becomes much, much more like meditating on the cushion, in the sense that no matter what it's directed to, and no matter how often it is changed reasonably, your attention is always someplace appropriate. You always have an expanded awareness, and that awareness is playing a very important role in informing you when your attention is moving, why it's moving, and whether or not those movements are appropriate, right? Throughout the process of developing meditative skills and the resultant abilities, that's right through stage 6 through stage 7, you can develop all of these same skills and abilities in a form that's appropriate to your daily life. And having done so, you will be able to meditate 24 hours a day because you will know how, because you've practiced at that. As far as everything in the adept stages, those are all insight practices. And the same thing, this is how you apply those meditative skills. You apply them in a way that is conducive to deepening understanding of, well, of yourself, of your relationship to everything. That's essentially all there is. So meditation, it's as you get into the adept stages, as you become an adept meditator, as you've been able to bring all of these different skills and capabilities into your daily life, you're also going to be applying them in your daily life. So you're going to be doing practices that somebody might refer to as insight practices, but you're doing them where they're most important. Now that's really where the mindful review comes into it. It is an example of an application of meditation to an aspect of daily life, bringing mindfulness into your daily life. So,
lovely. I think that's really helpful. And if I remember correctly, you have also talked about this to some degree in one of the talks that you gave that's on the TMI archive. You did do some talks about bringing meditation into daily life, so people can check that out if they want to. I think I have one more question before we go back to the Kochi's stronghold circa 2000. Oh, sorry, you wanted to add something?
Don't lose that question. It occurred to me that I could expand a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
A formal practice that we would do, another formal practice that we might do is loving kindness meditation. That is an application of your practice that you can bring into your daily life. You don't have to be sitting with your eyes closed and visualizing these things. You don't have to be sitting with your eyes closed to call up the appropriate mental states that are part of metta meditation or loving kindness meditation. You can learn to do that in your daily life. You can make your interactions with real people in real time into a meta practice. Now, I think no one could deny the obvious value of that. Imagine practicing metta in every interaction. Wow, that's sure worth moving in that direction, isn't it? Another one would be uh, analytical meditation. If you could learn to think and respond to all of the myriad little problems and situations that arise during the day, and using the methods that you apply in analytical meditation, how much more powerful would be your ability to cope with the situations that you're confronted with? How much more likely are you to come up with good solutions, more useful interpretations, etc., and so on, of real life events if you're applying those skills that you've developed in formal analytical meditation practice? So I
Lovely.
just wanted to expand that.
No, that's great. And I mean, now that you've mentioned that, I think the other obvious one is walking meditation, because we're often walking all the time to our car, from our car to the shopping center, whatever. So there are all these opportunities to develop these skills, maybe will not be as sharp initially as one does, standing outside in a park by yourself when you're rushing to the bank or whatever, but you can still bring in those elements, and as you get more developed in them, that'll become easier, right?
Yep, that's right.
Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. Because that question does come up a lot. People want to know how they can bring it into their lives. And you, of course, said early on in the book, you really need to not have this artificial division between meditation, your formal practice, and then the rest of your life. Then you're filling a leaky bucket, right? Yeah.
Yes. In my original drafts of the Mind Illuminated, before it got trimmed out of necessity, just it was already too much information, right? But for each of the stages, I had a section at the end that I called adjunctive practices, and these are ways that you could practice the particular skills in that stage in your daily life. But that was too much.
That sounds fantastic. I wonder whether that could be put up at some stage in the form of a blog post or something like that. I'm sure people would appreciate that. I know you have so many things you want to do anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. There are so many things that I would like to do, so many things I could do that I see would be beneficial for people to have available. But I'm in this unfortunate situation of, I only have so much time and energy, and I'm not even sure how much that is. So I have to be very careful how I budget it.
Right.
And I certainly can't do all the things that I would like to do.
And that, just as a reminder, though, of course, that is the case for all of us. We don't know how much time or energy we have left. So, make the most of what you do have, right?
That's right. That's right. The only difference between me is that it's pretty obvious that I can't just blithely go on thinking, well, I've got to,
Exactly. You did mention one other thing that I'd like to ask you about, and you said a little earlier that there are certain things that you need to do each day or need to attend to in your med. Are you able to share with us anything about that?
Well, I'm not sure how you interpreted that. I'm not even sure what I was referring to at the time.
Well, the way I interpreted it, that there were certain practices that you make sure to engage in every day or something like that. I thought perhaps it had something to do with your health, or so I'm not sure what you meant there, which is why I wanted to come back and ask you about it.
Well, certainly there are things that I absolutely need to do for the sake of my health. I have a great deal of difficulty maintaining my weight. I have a great deal of difficulty eating. Eating doesn't hold much appeal. I have to discipline myself to prepare and eat foods and do it enough times during the day.
Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of obvious things that everybody has to spend time doing. Uh, Sometimes they take me longer because of my physical conditions and things like that. But there's all kinds of the normal maintenance activities of daily life.
Mhm.
Plus the fact that, like everyone else, I've got to prepare my documents for my income tax return so that I can get filed on time.
Uh,
Just like everyone else, I've got to reconcile my bank statement and make sure my bills get paid. I mean, life is full of things that you just they're maintenance things, but you don't have any choice about them. You've got to do them.
Kevin Griffin, an author, called them and I think he said that Buddha actually called it this, but the dukkha of maintenance. Um, I don't know whether there's actually a term like that, but certainly all those things, taking a shower, having a shave, having a meal, all these things can be meditation practices as well, right? Even doing your taxes, you can do it mindfully.
That's right. Yes, it has to be done. Best be done mindfully, but there are only so many hours of consciousness that we have available during the day. And to be quite honest, I've always felt like they took up too much of my time. I've only got so much time in the day, and I've got to use so much of it for all these other things, which made it nice to be in situations at different times in my life where somebody else would do some of them, like the cooking and the laundry and stuff like that. But then again, that's just another burden that falls on somebody else. But anyway, as I've gotten older, and I used to be much quicker and more efficient. Now, all these things take so much longer.
Takes longer, right?
Not to mention that there's extra things that I have to do now that I didn't have to do when I was 30.
Right, right. I mean, I remember you saying in one interview that you used to only have one meal a day because you found that, preparing and consuming a meal took up too much time and you had too many other things you wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm in a situation where if I don't eat 3 or 4
Yeah,
times a day, I lose weight.
exactly. Right. Yeah. So if you're all right with it, let's go back to the Kochi stronghold circa 2000, turn of the millennium. I think it was more or less where we left off.
Yes.
You had built the straw bale house, which instead of moving into, you and Nancy turned into a sort of bed and breakfast wilderness retreat. And you talked a little bit about that. I think that's more or less where we left off. And you were still living in the yurt.
Yes, we were still living in the yurt. We all together lived in that yurt for 12 years. Um, uh,
And at that time, you were no longer going back to Canada. You'd given up that thing, so you were full time at the retreat. I think you also mentioned at some stage your parents came and moved, built a house on the property or built something on the property with you.
yeah, that was a number of years later. So we're talking about, I guess, the time that I got up to, and the chronology of things was about the year 2000. We had completed the straw bale. I had recognized that this going back and forth to Canada, and also I'd gotten involved in a number of other things that led me to be traveling to Washington D.C. and to Illinois and things like that to be involved in professional organizations. I realized that was not only was I not spending my time the way I had wanted to and intended to when I gave up everything else and moved back to Arizona, but my being away was really slowing down, making a comfortable place for us to live, and that it wasn't really good for my family. By this time, let's see, my son would have been about 11 years old. And, as children get older, certainly as boys get older, they need more time and attention from their father as they get older. And it's not good when your father's away for half of the year. Uh, and some of those in big, not, fortunately, I wasn't away for 6 months of the year, but, still, I was away for uh, sometimes 2 or 3 months at a time. And well, there were a lot of ways where it was not a less than ideal situation. And so I phased out those things, and that led to us, instead of moving into this house that we had built, and we pretty much exhausted the last of our resources in doing that. As a matter of fact, the completion of the house was it was slowed down because I'd have to go back to Canada and earn some money so I could come back and do the next stage in the construction of it. So, it, I needed to make some changes. And so that's why the house ended up being a bed and breakfast. And over the next few years, it was built into a very successful bed and breakfast from our point of view. Nancy did win the governor's award for tourism one year for the way that she marketed the bed and breakfast, how successful it was. She had all of these notebooks that people would write their comments, and we just had tens of thousands of comments from very satisfied, happy people. So in every dimension, well, except the financial, it was a great success. And using the bed and breakfast, using the straw bale house as a bed and breakfast was very successful in that way. We also set up a teepee. We had 2 teepees over the subsequent years. People absolutely loved those as a way to, they'd come for, whether it was a single person or family, they would love staying in a teepee. And we made sure it was very comfortable, things like that. During this period, we made this transition. The bed and breakfast operation started working. As I say, it pretty much exhausted our financial resources, and I had cut off these alternative sources of income. But the wonderful thing about that bed and breakfast business and living basically where the business was operating is that our expenses, our personal expenses, basically came down to gas, food, and clothing. Even the gas part of it, we could combine most of our own needs for travel with business trips to buy groceries or supplies or plumbing parts or whatever we needed for the bed and breakfast. So it was a situation where our income was almost zero. And the income from our business, we didn't have other sources of personal income. Our income from the business, typically, we'd file our income tax and the net profit would be $5,000 for the year, something like that. But we were able to live and be comfortable. And, I always had enough. Well, even with the groceries, we cooked breakfast, we provisioned dinners, we made lunches for the bed and breakfast guests. There were always food supplies left over. You make a lunch for a family of 4, and you've opened these packages of things that are not going to keep, and you're not going to be serving another lunch the next day. So of course this supplemented. So we were able to live on virtually nothing for years in that way. Being home in the canyon all the time allowed our situation to evolve more in the direction that I had always wanted it to. So we obtained and set up another yurt. I had all of my books, which I'd been collecting, I guess, since I was first entered university, and had added to extensively in the years when I had owned a bookstore, especially Buddhist and other spiritual books. And then, of course, in all my years in Vancouver, I had a wide range of interests, which supplied through. So I had a very substantial library, which at that time, around 2000 or so, was stored in boxes in a storage locker in town, and some of it was stored in boxes in an old shed that was on the property. We got another smaller yurt. I set that up as a meditation yurt and as a library. And so I built all of these bookshelves, aligned the inner walls of the yurt with the bookshelves, put my library in place, put our meditation cushions, made a little altar and things like that. And now this was really starting to become the life that we left our other life in order to engage in. Living in this absolutely beautiful place, making our living by making people happy, right? And having the time and the place to meditate and engage in all kinds of and spiritual practices in whatever form seemed appropriate. So yeah, this was a lot of things coming to fruition in that period of time there. This was the first time in my life that I ever started coming close to teaching. And I think I've talked to you before about how leery I was of teaching, but I started getting involved in internet discussion groups. Now, we're talking 20 years ago. And now, of course, there's too much stuff on the internet about meditation and Buddhism and things like that. It's impossible to keep track of. Back in those days, it was new. It was just starting up. There wasn't a lot. And if you got involved in that and you had anything to say, you tended to attract attention. I had always tried to avoid attention, but I became involved in these discussion groups, and I couldn't help sharing advice based on the things that I'd learned. And that attracted attention, both positive and negative attention. As I'm sure you're very well, the enormous amount of egotism in the whole Dharma meditation scene. Everybody's right and everybody else is wrong. Everybody has the best way or the best teacher and all these other things, So there's enormous room for contentiousness. So on the one hand, there was a positive response. People appreciated the comments that I made and the advice I gave. And other people were offended by it for whatever reason. One of the interesting things that happened is there was a couple of discussion groups that I had been participating in. And there were a few very assertive people who I think probably until I came along, it probably had tended to dominate the discussions on those boards. And some of the exchanges started to get pretty nasty. And it was at this point that there was someone, I don't remember when this was exactly, sometime between 2000, 2004, maybe something like that. When things were getting a little bit nasty there and I was about to withdraw from participation, one of the people on one of the boards started a completely new discussion board, a Yahoo group called Jhana_Insight. And so I moved over to that and began to participate very actively. And it was a sort of thing that since I was the first one on that group to be in a position to be sort of a go-to person for answers to questions, I didn't at least immediately have a lot of people sort of attacking me and questioning what I said and things like that. this is where I started to get drawn into a teaching role, and I did feel very uncomfortable with that. So there were several things that I did. One is that, well, nobody knew anything about where I was. The only name they had was Culadasa. They had no idea what country I lived in, much less what state in the United States or anything like that. As a matter of fact, as it turned out, the person who had started this new group lived in Tucson, which was only 90 minutes away from where I lived. But it wasn't until years later that he found out that we were in such close proximity. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, things that I did because I was leery of being in this teaching role. I found that I was often answering the same questions and giving the same advice over and over again. So, and a lot of the questions, of course, were very basic questions corresponding to the first three stages of what's described in the Mind Illuminated. And so rather than keep saying the same thing over and over again, I sort of wrote these up. Well, what I ended up doing, I think I finished in summer of 2006. I think I posted stage 6 from India in summer of 2006, in June of 2006. So over a couple of years, I had done an early version of the first 6 stages of the Mind Illuminated, posted in the document section of the Jhana Insight board. And so from that point on, I could just refer people to that and keep a lower profile than myself, right?
But you were also one of the few sort of people, Westerners, who could say that they had practiced the more what the so-called hard jhanas and things
Yes.
like that. So, but you had then created this FAQ for people who were struggling with the common problems that you experience in any meditation system when you start out, right? The first 3 or 4 stages.
Yes, that's the thing that I discovered. You know, I had been part of a community of people who were meditators, and of course, some of them were more dedicated, some of them were further along, some had been spending more time than others. But I had the good fortune to have been associating in Canada with a lot of people that were pretty decent meditators. And there were, as it came to light how many meditators there were out there, I had assumed that this larger North American population of meditators, that the group, you know, my own community of meditators that I'd been a part of in Canada for all those years, were a reflection, fairly accurate, of all of these other people who'd been meditating for years in different groups. What I discovered first with that discussion board, and then even more so in person with people at about the same time, is that most of the people who were meditating and had been meditating for years, regardless of what system they were using, they mostly weren't past stage 2. Some were at stage 3. Very few, very few were at stage 4. And those were the ones that were considered to be the real master meditators, right?
Right.
Very few people were at that level. And it's like, well, I'll talk to you about my in-person experience. In, I don't know, 2001, I think it was. We were living in a yurt on one side of the Dragoon Mountains. We were Buddhist meditators. We not only were living in a yurt, we had another yurt that was our meditation yurt. And these people came to the other side of the mountain and they put up some yurts, and there was a group of them that were going into a 3-year retreat, silent retreat. And so people that knew about us and found out about them, they told us, they told them. So Nancy and I ended up going around the other side of the mountains and getting to know these people. And so that was a fairly large community of people. The teacher was Geshe Michael Roach, and the organization was called Diamond Mountain. And so there was, and along with Geshe Roach and the 4 women that he was doing retreat with, 3-year retreat with, came hundreds of other people from all over the country. And well, like I say, we got to know them, they got to know us. What I had been doing since we'd set up our meditation yurt is I'd been taking 1 day a week. You know, this had been my practice for years, but taking 1 day a week where I would spend most of the day in the meditation yurt practicing. And as people came to find out about that, they started asking, you know, can we come and meditate with you? And once again, my leeriness of being put in the position of a teacher came to the fore. And I said, sure, you can come sit with me if you want to, but I'm not going to teach you. So what happened over a fairly short period of time of a few weeks, and on those days, we did this on Monday. So every Monday would be dedicated to meditation. And it gradually increased till we had 6, 7, then 10, 11, 12 people at a time coming on Mondays to meditate with us. They'd come in the morning, and then they started bringing food to share for lunch. So we'd end up having a sort of a potluck lunch and discussion time. What I discovered is that all of these people were very serious practitioners. Of course, they had to have been to follow some teacher halfway across the country, but they had been practicing. Many of them had been practicing for years, decades, and yet, just as with the people that I'd come across on the internet, they had never managed to get past the stage of a beginning meditator. So, you know, now I was very resistant to teaching. In those potluck lunch sessions after our morning meditations, people would start asking me questions. And of course, I answered those, but I began to feel uncomfortably as though I was being drawn into the teacher role, which I didn't want. But at the same time, the more they would reveal about themselves, the more obvious their dedication, the importance of this, the time that they put in became. And it's like, I couldn't selfishly not answer their questions. So this is where I started getting led into the role of teacher.
Could you perhaps just remind us again what your leeriness about teaching, what your hesitancy was to get involved in the teaching role? Because certainly you were in a large degree self-taught in that you studied by yourself and you figured a lot of this stuff out on your own. Yes, you did have teachers, but a lot of it was your own work, right?
Well, what has happened in my life is we started out with, there were no teachers available anywhere. So then I had a few. I was fortunate to have exposure to a very small number of very good teachers. Jodhidhamma, Kemananda, Namgyal Rinpoche, and some of Namgyal Rinpoche's other students. But there began to emerge more and more teachers. And what I saw a general pattern with all of these new teachers that were emerging, that regardless of how they started out, they ended up being caught up their egos, uh, clinging to their role as teachers, the prestige, all of this other kind of stuff. And it's like, what a trap. How are they going to get out of that? And of course, uh, the more admiration and adulation and everything else the students showed, the harder it would be for any of those teachers to come out of that. There were a few scandals came out. The other thing that I saw in some of the people that I had known in one way or another before they became fairly active and well known as teachers is that they had been, because of their dedication and their sincerity and the intensity of practice, they had been, they had been progressing steadily in skills and knowledge and wisdom. But I saw as they became teachers, that stopped. Wherever they were, there's a certain point where just as long as they were in that teacher role, it seemed like there was just no way that they could go beyond that. And so I saw it as an ego trap, a place of just falling back into all the worst aspects of what the untempered human nature leads to. And even when that wasn't such a big factor, it still seemed to arrest the progress of their practice. A different aspect of the egotism was that they became very defensive of their views. And of course, as the Buddha said, everything is ultimately views. And he also said people with views just go around annoying each other. And, regardless of whether they were getting caught into other aspects of egotism, what I did see is that all of these people were becoming extremely defensive and irritating each other about their views on things. So I had all these reasons like, man, I do not want to get involved in that. I don't want that to happen to me.
And then you also said you were someone who, from a psychological standpoint, was conflict averse. That was not something that you enjoyed, and you tried to stay out of. So it makes complete sense that that is something that you would probably have very hesitatingly gone into.
That's right. Yeah.
But you are left with a dilemma where you're seeing people who are sincere, dedicated practitioners spending years and years of their life really doing their best. But if you're not being taught, or you're not being taught the right thing, then it's not going to benefit you at all, right?
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. That is right. So what my solution to that, and it has become my description of what any meditation teacher, any Dharma teacher, and for that matter, I think any teacher at all should be, well, actually, it's the way I regarded myself teaching neuroscience, physiology, anatomy, pathology, all of these other things years before. So all kinds of, the attitude was, I'm not a teacher. I'm somebody who has more knowledge and experience in a particular area than you. You, I'm sure, have much more knowledge and experience in other areas than I do. But since we've come together around this topic that I happen to have more knowledge and experience of, then as your friend, not as your teacher or your superior or anything like that, as your friend, let me share with you what I know. Let me help you to understand it. And so I tried to prevent the teacher-student thing from developing by saying that frequently on an individual and a group basis, when I would sense the teacher thing happening. Well, the people that I were working with and when people started coming to my Monday meditations, they already had a quote teacher that they held, he was a guru. So it was much easier with them. So, it's like they were less inclined to put me on a pedestal as a teacher because they already had somebody on a pedestal as a teacher. And I could just be this guy on the other side of the mountain that was that they could go to and who could uh, give them some advice and as a spiritual friend. But that did set the tone to my entire approach to teaching. Like I say, it had its roots in how I saw myself when I was teaching sciences, but it really came full bloom to when I accepted myself as a teacher and said, that this is what it means to me to be a teacher. Now, there's some of these things that uh, expressions of respect and honor, like anjalis and things like that, well, I love myself. I think are very wonderful and valuable things. And the people that I was initially involved with, they always did this as a sign of respect. Like I said, they had their own guru. I wasn't their guru, but the Anjalis were always there. As things progressed over the next few years and more people were involved than just those who were already students of Geshe Michael, um, they also adopted all of these expressions of respect. So I added to my own description of myself as a teacher, well, there was two related things: is should I call you John or should I call you Culadasa? And the other one was should I always bow to you whenever you come into the room? And so I would address these questions on an individual basis, but I would also address them periodically to the group because new people would come in and not necessarily everyone was bold enough to come up and say, ask these questions. So what I would say is, to me, this means that I honor and respect you. And basically, I'm really glad you're interested in learning something about meditation and Dharma. So it's my expression of honor to you. When you do that to me, it means whatever it means to you, and it makes no difference to me whether you do it or not. But I said, I would tell everybody, I'd say, a lot of people do it. So I'm sure you'll feel a certain peer pressure to do it. But, be your own person. Don't do it unless you feel like it. Personally, I like doing it. If you approach it the way I do, maybe you'll like doing it too. You know, same thing with my name. Call me whatever feels more comfortable to you. And once again, there was the peer pressure thing. Everybody preferred to call me Culadasa. And so new people would come in and they would try calling me John for a little while, and then they'd switch over to Culadasa. So I just kept saying, whatever you want to call me, it doesn't really matter to me,
But still, in your own mind, you were not, because you didn't want to fall into that teacher trap. So in your own mind, you didn't take that as meaning this is a student, bowing down to you or something like that.
Yes, and it gave me the opportunity to tell them something about my name and what it meant to me. And a lot of people who have lost track of that. So it's worth me explaining it right now. It was my Upasaka name. It was a name that I was given as a part of the ceremony of dedicating my life to the study and practice of the Dharma. And the purpose of the name, and it's stated right in the ceremony, is that, and this reminds me, I'm going to do the ceremony with you soon. Anyway, the purpose of the name is, it says in the ceremony, from now on, the members of the Sangha will refer to this person as Upasaka or Upasika, whatever the name is. And then the preceptor turns to the Upasaka or Upasika and says, whenever you hear this name, be reminded of the commitment you have made here today. So the purpose of being called by an Upasaka name is basically saying, I support you in your aspirations. I support you in your commitment and dedication. I'm behind you. Go for it. That's what you're saying. It's not saying, oh, you must have accomplished something that makes you special, or you must be special in some way, or having this name gives you the right to teach or gives you some kind of, that's all nonsense. That's total misunderstanding. Other names from other traditions may mean things like that. But in the Upasaka tradition, calling somebody by their Upasaka name is a way of saying, I support you in your dedicating your life to this rather than to all the other worldly things. It's not a sign. What I've seen is people that I have ordained as upasakas and upasikas using that name and allowing people to think that somehow I had bestowed upon them some kind of approval or imprimatur, that this is somebody who is worth listening to. This is somebody who is qualified to teach the Dharma. Well, nonsense. I will ordain anybody as an upasaka who I feel like understands what it's about, the personal dedication that it involves. And part of the ceremony, so part of the ceremony also, 3 times in a row, the upasaka to be is reminded that this does not grant you any special status.
Right. Yeah.
But people don't know that.
Right, because you are then regarded as a dedicated lay practitioner. You are not. This is not a religious title that's being given to you in the same way as someone who becomes a Rinpoche or a Lama or something like that, right?
Yeah. There's no recognition of any level of attainment.
It's actually all about you and your own choice and dedication that you've made, right?
And I'll also add to this, since there were people very close to me that decided to stop calling me Culadasa, is what you're saying is that I no longer support you in your aspirations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So they've just sort of misunderstood. It's not because they possibly thinking that I no longer acknowledge you as a teacher or as someone who's attainment or has accomplishments in the Dharma.
Right.
But that's not at all what the Upasaka vows. Right, I get it. So certainly what you did though in sharing your information with people, like sharing your experiences and helping people with their practice, was as a fellow traveler on the path, not as a teacher or a guide. And that's actually quite hard, particularly it seems for Westerners to understand that, because it's breaking with the Eastern traditional models where, in Zen or in Tibetan systems, where you are expected to make a really formidable commitment to whoever your teacher is, and basically not question what they say and just follow their practices. And that does seem to have been a useful system to some degree in those parts of the world and in those cultures, but doesn't always seem to work out well here in the West.
Well, that's right. Western culture is totally different than Eastern culture. And guru yoga is the most toxic thing that has ever been imported to the West from the East, at least in terms of Eastern spiritual practices.
Yeah.
Because Westerners interpret it in a completely different way.
Right, and this is what I read. As I read, someone maybe, let's say, have a Zen master. Let's say they're in Japan, they're Japanese, they have a Zen master. They don't just blindly follow their Zen master. That's not what it's about either. But it's a certain level of respect that they show. But it's not about giving up your individuality or your will or your critical thinking skills at all. I don't think that even in that system that's really what it's about entirely.
Right. That's right.
There's a certain level of trust that you give to that person in terms of following their instruction, right? But you don't become a mindless cult member, as we see sometimes happens here with Western gurus.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So these were all things that I did in an attempt to, you might say, keep my practice pure and still be able to be of assistance to people and meditation and Dharma. And this is also how I gradually got more and more into being a teacher. Now, so you've got the picture. I'm especially active on the Jhana Insight group. I posted the first 6 stages of what was eventually became the Mind Illuminated in the document section of that group. So, and it did get pretty widely accessed by people. Um, I was conducting my Monday meditations, which at some point became Wednesday meditations. Something else was happening on Mondays. These were students from Diamond Mountain were coming, and gradually more and more people that had no affiliation with Diamond Mountain. So we had quite a sizable population of people that would venture, an hour or two journey to come and be together with us once a week. Eventually ended up on Sundays, but went from Monday meditation to Wednesday meditation to Sunday meditation. And a growing group that was more and more heterogeneous from a lot of different people, places, from different traditions and things like that. We're coming together once a week. And the other thing that happened is because I was so active online, the internet, I drew the attention of a number of people in the Chinese community in California. And it was a period during which a lot of people were trying to find out, who I was and where I was, and were asking me, can I come visit you? All these kinds of things. And I refused to let that happen. But there was this growing community of people in Southern California, and they were sort of being de facto led by a young man who's doing his Ph.D. in Buddhist studies at the University of West in Rosemead. And so I was invited to come out and speak at University of West. And that seemed like a safe thing to do. I could maintain my anonymity, but as I got to know these people much better, and this same young man and several others that had been pretty uh, pretty intense in their interest in me for quite a while, I broke down and said, well, you can come, and we let them stay in the bed and breakfast accommodations, and we all meditated together in our meditation yurt. And that was the beginnings of the closest thing to a sangha that I had ever, I use the term sangha a little bit loosely, that's all right.
Yeah.
But the closest thing to a sangha that I was ever teaching directly to. Keep in mind, these were all people who had been raised Buddhist, mainland China or Taiwan, or some of them were first generation, Americans, but their parents were from Taiwan or mainland China, and their heritage was Buddhist. And most of them already belonged to some Buddhist temple or organization. Um, so I could maintain my own comfort level in this. They began coming out, groups of them more and more often, wanting to, can we come back out to the stronghold and spend a weekend, spend a week, spend 10 days? So I began leading retreats. And then, can you come to California? There's one of the temples here has a meditation retreat house. organize everything if you'll just come and lead a retreat. So I went from leading retreats at my place to leading retreats in Southern California, becoming progressively more and more in the role of a teacher. But just as the Diamond Mountain students had their own guru, and the other people that came were coming from different traditions, I managed to, most part, maintain this I'm a friend of yours and an equal that knows a little bit more about these things. I'm not your guru, I'm not your teacher. And I did the same thing with that group there. The
Can I
next
just
thing that
ask,
happened,
sorry, Chuladasa, I just want to ask, so it sounds to me like your focus though was you were not teaching religious Buddhism, you were helping people with their practice. Is that right? So it
that's
was,
right.
that's how you managed to keep it sort of trans lineage, and it didn't really matter whether they were
Yeah.
Nirochen Buddhists or you know Zen Buddhists or whatever. They could benefit from your advice for their practices. Is that right?
That's right. And as far as religious Buddhism went, whenever it came up, and Dharma issues, of course, come up. They're an inherent, intrinsic part of meditation. You can't really separate the two, and I would never want to. But frankly, a lot of the things that I had to say were heretical to the
Mhm.
traditional Chinese uh, peasant Buddhist views that they'd been raised with. And so, and they would argue with me about them. So that helped to maintain this, you know, that helped to keep us on the same level. You know,
Right.
long as you can disagree with me in front of everybody else, we're okay.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So sorry, I interrupted you there, but I just wanted to check in on what the
Uh,
sort of structure of these teachings was.
I don't even know where I was going to go next. Well,
Well, you were being asked to come to California. You said being asked to lead retreats, places, and
yes, right. This was happening um, 2005, 2006, 2007. It was towards the end of 2007 that, November, that I had developed catastrophic muscle weakness. And January of 2008, I was diagnosed as having motor neuron disease, ALS. Um, but it was also in 2007 that the person who had started the Jhana Insight discussion group,
Mhm.
who lived in Tucson, uh, I finally revealed to him who I was and that I was basically a neighbor. Uh, and he was very much involved with the Tucson Community Meditation Center. So he talked to members of the board of Tucson Community Meditation Center, and they invited me to come and uh, basically do a weekend teaching on the stages of meditation. Now, this was years, we're talking about 2007. It was September of 2015 that the Mind Illuminated was published. But the first stages, the beginning stages of meditation have been published online back in about, I think, 2003. And stage 6 had been posted in June of 2006. So, you know, I taught a more complete version of the of, of the stages of meditation, and it was well received by members of the Tucson Community Meditation Center, TCMC. So I was subsequently invited to start teaching regularly on Thursday night. And so this was added to the whole panoply of teaching activities that I was engaged in. And I was actually in these Thursday night sessions at TCMC that the things came up about, uh, should we bow to you or not? What should I
Right.
do? All this kind of stuff. I'd pretty much avoid those kinds of things until I was having members of the general public walk in on Thursday and listen to me talk. So, and that's how I got into teaching. That's also the beginning of the story of up until November of 2007, I was the healthiest person that I I was the healthiest person that my personal physician knew. I saw her once a year, and she would usually say, "So my healthiest patient is here for his annual checkup." But I've had one catastrophic physical illness after another since it all began in November of 2007. The best health that I enjoyed between 2007 and today was a period um, in 2015, latter part of maybe the last couple of 2014, up until the biopsy and diagnosis of my cancer in October of 2015. I was I was on the way to becoming as healthy as I had once been uh, uh, 7 years earlier.
So, um, so you'd been diagnosed, and we now know later on you were misdiagnosed with MLS. Um, I think that,
ALS.
sorry,
ALS.
oh, sorry, AL, okay, no, ALS. So, sorry, I was thinking of MS. That's what.
Yeah, I know you were.
So, but by that time you had kind of reluctantly started teaching, but again, more as a Kalyanamita, as a spiritual friend than as an actual teacher. But that seemed to be that people were demanding more and more that you step into that
Yeah,
formal teacher role.
yes, that was happening.
Right. Um, I think we're just about out of time for today, Culadasa, and I am going to be seeing you again on Wednesday, I think. Does that
Mhm.
sound like a good place to for us to take a pause?
Yes, it does. Let me just, in terms of several different trajectories. So,
Yeah.
this was really teaching is one of them. This was an important juncture in terms of my health.
Yeah.
Um, it's also a point at which this is when Dharma Treasure was formed. And it was in 2008 that I began the process of forming Dharma Treasure. And what I'll get into next time is why I did that and all
Yes.
of these other things. So yeah, there may be some other things about my personal life and things like that I've glossed over, and they'll, to the degree that they're relevant, they'll probably come up in their own.
All right. Well, I think maybe between now and the next time we meet, if there's anything that you feel, well, that would have, might be useful to mention, bring it up on Wednesday. But we'll start off there with around about 2007, and
Right.
seeing where things go from there. Thank you so much, Culadasa. It was wonderful as always.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed this very much.
Thank you very much. And
Kind of
just
nice reminiscing. It's an interesting thing that my past was always my past, and I never thought about it much.
right,
So, events of the last years sort of put me in a situation where I felt I had no choice but to try to go back and review my past history and how did I get where I am. And having done so, it's lovely to have this opportunity with you and to go back to even a much earlier point and do the same thing.
right,
This, I have never ever seriously reflected on my own life before.
right.
So this is an amazing process for me that you're guiding me into.
Well, and what I keep thinking about, and that I talk to my mom about, and so on, is that there was this emphasis perhaps that I put too much on in the introductory video that you mentioned to me on suffering,
Mhm.
and but yet in all talking about all the difficult travails you've been through, that mostly what I've seen from you is a lot of sort of joy and that warm, rosy retrospection of life. And that's wonderful that you can look back and go, well, that was actually a wonderful time. I got so much out of it. Even though I had these problems, I was still, enjoying life, or these wonderful things were happening to me. And it's so great to hear that that's how you are experiencing it.
Yes, and the fact that I'm relating these events from the present perspective, I suppose, mislead people. Most of my life has been horribly painful, enormous amount of suffering. All these things that amounted to uh, career interruptions, major life shifts, marriages that didn't work out, alienation from children, all these sorts of things. These were horribly traumatic for me, just as they would be for anybody else.
Right.
At looking back on them from a present perspective, they may not sound that way.
Yeah.
But they truly were. My life was, as I suppose anybody's life is in their own perspective, series of crises and trauma.
Right. Right.
And it's wonderful to be in a place where none of any of those things could happen to me again. And it was, yeah, well,
They don't touch you in the same way that they,
right.
and that's exactly the term that psychologists use, rosy retrospection, which is the tendency of people to look back on their past and sort of minimize or edit out the bad bits and only remember the good bits. So I think hopefully what you're also doing is going like, yes, that was a terrible situation at the time. Now it doesn't seem so terrible, but I acknowledge that, John back then, Culadasa back then, was having a really tough time with that. And so, as you say, be careful, I suppose, as we go forward, not to gloss over things too much, because one of the things that I was hoping to do with this is just that people can realize, like, you can go through these bumps in life, and sometimes they're big bumps and they're very difficult, and still be okay on the other end.
Yes, that's true, and that is the most thing. Like I said, I think in my life I had a lot of traumas that probably the majority of people are spared. They have a much smaller, maybe they're lucky enough that none of them are really that big. But my real point in this is that from everybody's personal life was filled with big things, right?
Yeah.
And whether objectively one person's life events seem that big and that traumatic compared to another's is pretty much relevant. As Victor said, everybody has their own Auschwitz.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I mean, it sounds to me like there's, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it does sound like there's no doubt that had you not have had this practice and the attainments that you went through, the path shifts and all of that, that had we been having this conversation without that, you would be telling the story in a very different way.
Yep.
Yeah, would probably sound a lot more.
The story would have unfolded in a very different way too.
Right. But you would probably be looking back and going, it was so awful and that ruined me and my whole life just went downhill from there. That sort of thing that people typically hear. Yeah.
Yes.
Lovely. So there's so much hope in the Dharma as well, and that's one of the things that I think is worthwhile to share with people. Fantastic. Well, I'll see you on Wednesday then. I'm going to just stop the recording here.